All right, let's dive into something pretty fascinating, something that we all see every day. I mean, well, some of us see every day.
Right.
And some of us maybe, see in the mirror.
Yeah.
We're going to be talking about beards,
Beards.
the history of
Wow.
beards. But what's so interesting about beards is that even scientists, they're not totally sure what the evolutionary purpose is.
Right.
Like, why do we have beards? What's the point?
It's a question that's puzzled a lot of people, even Darwin.
Right, when,
Darwin was like, what's the deal with beards? We're not really sure.
Right.
It's one of those mysteries
Yeah.
that we still haven't totally cracked.
Mhm.
But, even though we don't know exactly why we have them, beards have played a huge role in, pretty much every culture throughout history.
Yeah.
I mean, they've been symbols of power, of masculinity, of spirituality. And the way people have viewed beards has changed so much over time.
Right.
And it's really like a window into how societies have viewed men and their roles.
So I guess to start out, I mean, why don't we go all the way back, ancient times,
Yeah.
like Mesopotamia and Egypt.
Perfect.
I mean, what was going on there? Like, what was the whole beard situation in those places?
Okay, so in ancient Mesopotamia and Egypt, beards were a big deal,
Okay.
like a really big deal.
Okay.
They were seen as a symbol of strength, of leadership. You often see like ancient kings and warriors depicted with these like massive, impressive beards. Almost like it's part of their uniform.
Right.
The beard is like, I am powerful. I am a leader. Respect me.
It's like a lion's mane.
Exactly. It's all about projecting that aura of power and authority. But here's the interesting thing. At the same time, in these same cultures, shaving was also really significant. So priests and scribes, they often went clean-shaven.
Oh.
And this was because shaving was associated with purity, with being closer to the gods.
So it's kind of like a paradox, right?
Totally.
Like on one hand, you have the beard as a symbol of worldly power.
Right.
And on the other hand, you have the clean-shaven face representing like spiritual purity.
Right.
So how do you reconcile those two?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. Kings, in particular, had this sort of dilemma. They needed to embody both power and piety.
Right.
So they came up with some creative solutions. For example, you see Mesopotamian kings depicted in different ways. Some statues show them with these amazing beards, right?
Yeah.
And then others show them clean-shaven.
Wow.
Almost like they're trying to, like, hedge their bets,
Right.
appeal to both sides.
Have it both ways.
Exactly. And then you have the Egyptians.
Okay, the Egyptians, what were they doing?
Okay, so the Egyptian pharaohs, they were something else.
Okay.
They wore these, like, fake beards.
Fake beards.
I know. Like, what?
Yeah.
It's kind of wild. But these weren't, like Halloween costume beards. These were elaborate things, made of precious metals, sometimes even with gold and jewels woven in.
Oh, wow.
And they were a symbol of their, like, divine status. Like, they were gods on earth, And the beard was part of that whole image.
So they weren't even real beards. They were like a costume piece.
Yeah, like a royal accessory, I guess you could say.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, it really shows how important beards were in these cultures.
Okay, so let's move on to ancient Greece.
Okay.
I mean, the Greeks, they loved their philosophy.
They did.
They loved their sculptures.
Yes.
What was their take on the beard?
Well, the Greeks, they kind of followed that same pattern.
Okay.
Beards were associated with power. Think of Zeus, the king of the gods, with his big flowing beard.
Okay, yeah.
Or Heracles, the hero, known for his incredible strength.
Yeah, you always see him depicted that way.
Exactly. So it was like a very visual way of conveying these qualities of power, of strength, of masculinity.
Right.
And it wasn't just about physical power either. Greek philosophers, they also loved their beards.
Okay, philosophers, yeah.
They saw beards as a sign of wisdom, of intellect, of virility.
Oh, wow.
Like the beard was a sign that you were like a deep thinker, that you were engaged with the world in a powerful masculine way.
It's interesting. I mean, today we sometimes associate beards with, like a rugged look, maybe even a little bit unkempt.
Yeah.
But back then, it was really associated with this like refined intellectual image.
Yeah, and one of the most famous philosophers, Aristotle.
Oh, yeah, Aristotle.
He actually had a really interesting theory about beards.
Oh, okay, lay it on me.
He believed that beards were like a manifestation of a man's hot fluids, particularly semen.
Oh, wow.
And so, according to Aristotle, like the more robust your beard was, the more of these fluids you had.
So like a full beard was basically a billboard for good health.
In a way, yeah.
That's pretty funny.
It is kind of funny, right?
But it also shows you how they were trying to, like, read meaning into everything.
Exactly. They were looking for explanations for, why things were the way they were.
Okay, so we talk about how beards were seen as positive.
Yeah.
Was there ever a time when, you know, maybe not having a beard was actually seen as a good thing?
Well, yeah, actually.
Yeah.
So in ancient Greece, having a clean-shaven face, it could be seen as a little bit, well, unsettling,
Okay.
particularly in Athenian society,
Yeah.
where pederasty was practiced.
Right.
So a clean-shaven man, he might be seen as, like, too boyish, maybe even a little bit effeminate.
Okay, so it was kind of the opposite of what we were talking about before.
Exactly.
Like the beard was a way of, asserting your masculinity.
Right.
And not having a beard could be seen as almost like a sign of weakness or even, a lack of virility.
Right. And this is where we get to a really important figure in the history of beards.
Okay.
Alexander the Great.
Ah, yes. Alexander the Great.
So Alexander, he actually chose to be clean-shaven. And this wasn't just a personal preference. He
Wow.
was making a statement. By going clean-shaven, he was sort of aligning himself with a more youthful, almost divine image.
Okay, I see.
Kind of like the heroes of Greek mythology, you know?
Right.
And his decision, it actually had a huge impact on beard trends throughout the ancient world.
It's amazing how, one person's choice can kind of influence, like, the entire course of fashion.
Yeah, it's really powerful, isn't it?
Okay, so we talked about Mesopotamia, Egypt, Greece.
Yeah.
Let's move on to Rome.
Okay, Rome.
So what was going on with beards in Roman times?
Okay, so the Romans, at least initially, they followed that traditional view of beards.
Okay.
Beards being associated with martial valor, with republican virtue. Think of those iconic images of Roman senators, stern, serious, with their, like, flowing beards.
Yeah, the epitome of Roman power and gravitas.
Exactly. The beard was like, I am a Roman, I am strong, I am a leader.
Right.
But then Greek culture started to have a big influence on Roman society.
Okay, so things get a little complicated.
Exactly.
Like, is this where things start to change?
Yeah, so you have this kind of cultural tug of war going on.
Oh, wow.
On the one hand, you have Alexander's example.
Right.
Right, the clean-shaven look, that's becoming fashionable.
Right.
But on the other hand, some Romans are seeing this as like, oh, you're trying to be Greek.
Okay.
You're not a true Roman.
So the beard becomes this, like, political symbol almost.
Exactly.
It's a way of, like, signaling your loyalty, your cultural identity.
It's really fascinating, right?
It is. It makes you wonder if those Roman barbershops were, like, hotbeds of political debate.
Oh, I'm sure they were.
People arguing about beards and politics while getting their trims.
Absolutely. It's like, the ancient Roman version of social media, I guess.
Right. Okay, so what happens next? I mean, did the clean-shaven look, did it win out?
Well, eventually, yeah.
Okay.
By the 1st century BC, being clean-shaven had become, like, the standard in Roman society.
Okay.
But there's another twist.
Another twist.
So while most men were clean-shaven, carefully styled beards, they actually became, like, a status symbol among the elite.
Okay.
So it's like the beard goes from being, a symbol of power for everyone
Right.
to being this, like, exclusive thing, like, only for the wealthy and powerful.
Right.
And if you had an ungroomed beard, well, that was seen as a sign that you couldn't afford a good barber.
So it's like, it all comes down to grooming.
It really does.
Like, it's not just about having a beard or not having a beard.
Right.
It's about how you style it, how you maintain it.
Exactly.
And it's a whole other level of beard signaling.
Totally. But just when you think you've got it all figured out, clean-shaven is in, beards are for the elite.
Right.
Along comes Emperor Hadrian.
Oh, Emperor Hadrian.
And he decides to bring back the beard.
He's like, nope, we're doing beards again.
Yeah, basically.
So what was his deal? Like, why did he decide to go against the trend?
Well, historians are still debating that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, some think he was trying to connect with, like, those older Roman traditions, the ones we talked about before, those, like, virtues of strength and leadership.
Okay.
Maybe he was trying to appeal to the common soldier.
Right.
Many of whom had beards.
Right.
Maybe he just liked the look.
He's like, I'm the emperor. I can do what I want.
Exactly. But whatever his reason, his choice, it had a big impact. Just like Alexander's choice.
Yeah, I mean, trends come and go, I guess.
Yeah, but it's always interesting to see how those trends are influenced by, the people in power.
Yeah, very true.
Okay, so we've talked about beards in ancient Mesopotamia, Egypt, Greece, Rome.
Right.
What about early Christianity?
Ah, yes, early Christianity. I mean, this is where things get really interesting, right?
Yeah, so early Christianity, it's actually a bit of a mixed bag when it comes to beards.
Okay.
The earliest depictions of Jesus, they actually show him as clean-shaven.
Huh. I always thought of Jesus with a beard.
Yeah, it's a common image. But those early depictions, they were trying to connect Jesus with that Roman imperial image.
Okay, so clean-shavenness being associated with authority, with order.
Exactly.
So how did the bearded Jesus become the dominant image?
Well, there are a couple of things that contributed to that shift.
Okay.
One was a description of Jesus in the Old Testament,
Okay, the Old Testament.
in the book of Isaiah.
Okay.
There's a passage that describes a suffering servant, and it kind of implies that this servant has a beard.
Okay.
And people started to connect that image with Jesus.
Okay.
So you have that influence.
Right.
And then you also have this desire to portray Jesus as both human and divine.
Right. Right.
So the beard becomes a way of showing his humanity, his connection to the human experience of suffering.
So it's not just about power anymore.
Right.
It's about empathy, about compassion.
Exactly. But even within Christianity, you start to see some differences between East and West.
Okay, how so?
Well, in the East, beards continue to be seen as a sign of piety, of holiness.
Okay.
But in the West, clean-shavenness actually became more popular.
Huh. So why is that?
Well, there are a couple of theories. One is that it might have been influenced by the Vikings.
The Vikings. What do the Vikings have to do with this?
Okay, so the Vikings, right? They had these wild, untamed beards,
Yeah, I can picture them.
and they were seen as like the ultimate other by early Christians in the West.
Okay, I see.
You know, they were pagans, they were raiders, they were everything that Christians were supposed to be against.
So it was like a fear of the other that was shaping beard trends.
Exactly.
Like if you had a beard, you might be seen as, sympathetic to the Vikings or not a true Christian.
Right.
Ah,
And this fear, it actually had a lasting impact.
okay.
In the 11th century, the Gregorian reforms, which were aimed at purifying the church,
Okay.
they really solidified the link between clean-shavenness and religious purity in the West.
So it's amazing how these cultural anxieties, these power struggles,
Right.
they really left their mark on something as seemingly simple as facial hair.
Absolutely.
Wow, this is really fascinating stuff.
It is, isn't it?
It really makes you think about how much history we carry around on our faces.
Absolutely. And we've only just scratched the surface. We've
Right.
gone from ancient Mesopotamia to early Christianity.
Right.
But the story of beards, it doesn't end there.
Okay.
There's so much more to explore.
Okay, so what can we expect next time?
Well, next time we're going to journey through the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, all the way to the modern era.
Okay.
We'll see how beards have continued to evolve, how they've reflected changing social norms, cultural anxieties, fashion trends.
Okay, so I'm already intrigued.
It's going to be a wild ride.
All right, well, for all you beard enthusiasts out there, make sure to tune in next time as we continue our deep dive into the fascinating world of beards.
Absolutely. Welcome back to our beard adventure. Last time we left off, we just made it to the early days of Christianity.
Right, early Christianity.
It's pretty wild to think that something as basic as facial hair could be tied to all these big ideas like power and masculinity.
Yeah, it's not just about, whether you like the look or not.
No, not at all. It's about all this cultural baggage that comes along with it.
Right, right.
So, where do we go from here?
Well, I guess we keep moving forward in time, right? Like what happens after the Romans?
Okay, so let's jump ahead to the Middle Ages.
Okay, the Middle Ages.
So in the West, that idea of clean-shavenness being holy, especially for the church, that kind of stuck around.
Right.
But outside the clergy, beards were starting to make a comeback.
Interesting. So I guess those fears of the Vikings, they eventually faded away.
Yeah, exactly. And as secular power grew, so did the beard's connection to authority. I mean, think about those classic images of medieval kings and knights.
Oh, yeah, with those long flowing beards.
Exactly. It wasn't just a fashion thing. It was a way of showing their strength, their right to rule. Yeah.
Right, right. Like the beard was their crown.
Yeah, in a way it was. But even in the Middle Ages, there were still trends and variations.
Okay, like what? Different beard styles.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Different shapes, lengths, they all came in and out of fashion. But what's really interesting is how beards were used to show social status,
Ooh, like different professions had different beard styles.
Yeah, exactly. In some parts of Europe, merchants would have a certain type of beard and artisans would have another.
So it's almost like a beard-based code, right?
Totally. You could tell someone's job just by looking at their face.
That's pretty wild.
It is. And then as we get into the Renaissance, things get even more interesting.
The Renaissance. Now, that's a period I love. All that art, the incredible detail.
Oh, yeah. And those Renaissance men, they really knew how to rock a beard.
Yeah, I mean, those portraits, those perfectly sculpted beards.
It's like facial hair became its own art form.
Right, like they were taking it to a whole new level.
Exactly. And the Renaissance was all about rediscovering classical learning and art.
Right.
So they were looking back to ancient Greece and Rome for inspiration.
Okay, so how did that affect beards?
Well, think about figures like Leonardo da Vinci or Michelangelo.
Okay, yeah.
They often had those big, full beards, right? And it wasn't just about looking good.
Right.
They were intentionally trying to look like those wise philosophers and sages from the past.
So it's like they were saying, hey, look at me, I'm a genius just like Aristotle.
Exactly. The beard became the symbol of intellectual and artistic brilliance.
I love it.
But it wasn't just aesthetics either. Humanism was really big during the Renaissance.
Okay, humanism.
Yeah, it's this idea that emphasizes human potential, human achievement.
Okay.
And the beard fit perfectly with that. A well-groomed beard, it showed that you were refined, sophisticated, like you had mastered nature.
So it's not just about raw power anymore.
Right.
It's about being cultivated, being intellectual.
Exactly. And this trend continued into the 16th and 17th centuries.
Okay, so we're talking like Henry VIII.
Yeah, with his famous square-cut beard.
Right.
Or Shakespeare, whose beard was almost as famous as his plays.
Yeah, it's like those beards were part of their image.
No, exactly. They were branding themselves in a way.
Right.
And this was also a time of exploration and discovery, right?
Yeah, explorers sailing all over the world.
And those explorers, guys like Sir Walter Raleigh, they often had beards too.
Okay.
So it reinforced that connection between beards and adventure, masculinity, bravery.
That's like the explorer's uniform.
Totally. I can picture them out there on the high seas, their beards billowing in the wind.
Right, right. It's a great image. But I imagine not everyone was on board with this whole beard trend, right?
Oh, no, definitely not. There were always those who saw beards as, too flashy, too worldly.
Okay, like who?
Well, religious groups, like the Puritans, for example.
Okay, the Puritan.
They believed in simplicity and piety, and they saw those elaborate beards as a sign of vanity.
Okay, I see.
And in some parts of Europe, like France, being clean-shaven was still popular, especially among the aristocracy.
So it's like the beard was still a point of contention.
Exactly. And this tension continued into the 18th century, the Enlightenment, with all its emphasis on reason and logic.
Right.
While some intellectuals started to see beards as a symbol of the past, of superstition, of unreason.
So the beard was caught up in this whole philosophical debate.
Yeah, basically. It's amazing how facial hair could get so entangled with these big ideas.
Right, right. But then what happens? Did beards just disappear?
Well, just when it seemed like beards were losing ground, a new movement came along,
Yeah.
Romanticism.
Romantics. I knew they had to come into this story somewhere.
Right. They love a good beard.
Yeah, I bet they did.
They were all about emotion, intuition, connecting with nature, and the beard fit right in with that.
Right, right.
It became a symbol of authenticity, of virility, of rejecting that cold, rational Enlightenment thinking.
So the beard becomes like the badge of the romantic rebel.
Exactly.
Awesome.
And, this romantic fascination with beards, it had a lasting impact.
Okay, like what?
Well, think about Lord Byron, the quintessential romantic hero.
Oh, yeah, Lord Byron the poet.
Yeah, with his long hair and his, perfectly cultivated beard.
Right.
He was the image of the romantic ideal.
So the beard goes from being a symbol of, backwardness during the Enlightenment to being super cool and edgy in the Romantic era.
Yeah, it's a pretty dramatic shift.
It is. So what happens next?
Well, as we move into the 19th century, that romantic love for beards continued.
Okay.
Think about all those Victorian explorers, scientists, artists.
Oh, yeah, they all had those amazing beards.
Exactly. It was the era of the great beard.
It's almost like the beard represented man's power over nature.
Mm-hmm.
Conquering the wilderness, pushing the boundaries of knowledge.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's definitely that sense of, masculinity, adventure, the power of the wild.
Right, right.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing there were still some people who weren't big fans of beards, even in the Victorian era.
Oh, of course. Hygiene became a big concern around that time.
Okay, hygiene, yeah.
With outbreaks of diseases like cholera, people started to worry that beards were, breeding grounds for germs.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
There were even movements to ban beards in certain professions, like medicine.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, it was a whole debate.
So once again, the beard is caught up in these bigger social and political issues.
It always seems to be, doesn't it?
It does. So where do we go from there?
Well, as we enter the 20th century, those debates continue. The rise of the modern corporation with all its rules and expectations.
Right.
Well, that led to a decline in beards. Clean-shaven became the standard for a lot of workplaces.
So now the beard is seen as unprofessional.
Yeah, in a way. It's like if you want to be taken seriously, if you want to climb the corporate ladder, you got to shave.
Wow, so the beard goes from being this symbol of power and rugged individualism to being like a liability.
Yeah, it's a big shift. But just when you think the beard is on its way out,
What happens?
a new generation of rebels comes along.
The hippies.
Yeah.
I was wondering when they'd make an appearance.
Right.
They love their beards.
Oh, yeah. The 1960s saw a huge resurgence in beards,
Okay.
especially among those who were rejecting mainstream culture,
Right.
The beard became a symbol of protest, of rejecting traditional values, of wanting a more natural, authentic way of life.
It's like the beard is a symbol of everything the establishment is afraid of.
Exactly.
That's great.
And this connection between beards and counterculture, it's stuck around in different ways.
Okay, like what?
Well, think about the hipsters from a few years ago with their perfectly groomed beards and mustaches.
Right, the ironic hipster beard.
Exactly. Or that whole lumbersexual trend.
Right, the rugged outdoorsy look.
Yeah, so even today, the beard is still a powerful way to express yourself, your values, your identity.
It's amazing how the beard has managed to stay relevant, even in our modern world. It's a testament to its power as a symbol, I guess.
I think so too. But it does make you wonder, what's next for the beard? Where does it go from here?
It does seem like the beard's at a kind of a turning point, trying to figure out what it means in today's world.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, on the one hand, you've still got that hipster beard thing going on.
Right.
Which is kind of like all about irony and, being cool and detached.
Yeah, it's almost like a fashion statement, you know? Like you're signaling that you're part of a certain group, a certain subculture.
Exactly. But then at the same time, there's this whole other trend happening. Like people are getting into those more like traditional rugged beards again.
Oh, yeah, like the kind of beards those Victorian explorers had.
Yeah, exactly. It's all about authenticity, masculinity, connecting with nature.
It's interesting, right? Like the pendulum's swinging back to a more, primal view of the beard.
I think that's a great way to put it. And I think a lot of younger guys, they're kind of over that whole clean-shaven corporate look.
Right.
It feels too sterile, too conformist.
Yeah.
They want to stand out, express themselves. And the beard, well, it's a pretty powerful way to do that.
So it's like the beard's becoming a symbol of rebellion again. But this time, it's like a rebellion against the whole, the artificiality of modern life.
I think that's exactly right. And it's not just about looks either.
Okay.
People are becoming more aware of the environmental impact of all that shaving,
Right. All those razors and shaving cream.
Exactly. So the beard, in a way, it's kind of a more sustainable choice.
So the beard's going green.
I guess so. Who would have thought?
Right. It's amazing how something as simple as facial hair can get tied up with all these bigger issues.
Yeah, it is. But I think it shows just how powerful the beard is as a symbol. It's been around forever, changing and adapting with the times. And today, well, it seems like the beard's helping us grapple with all the complexity and uncertainty of modern life.
That's a really interesting way to think about it. It's not just hair, is it?
Definitely not. And I think that's what makes the history of beards so fascinating. It's like a glimpse into human culture, our fears, our hopes, our constant search for meaning.
Well said.
Yeah.
So what about those of us who, can't grow a beard? Are we just left out of this whole beard revolution?
No, not at all. I think the main takeaway here is that the beard, it's a personal choice.
Right.
It's about finding what works for you, what expresses who you are,
Right.
Whether you choose to rock a beard or stay clean-shaven, the important thing is to understand the history, the symbolism.
Yeah, that's a great point. So for those of you listening, I encourage you to, take a look in the mirror and ask yourself, what does my beard or lack of beard say about me?
Exactly. Maybe you'll see your own facial hair in a whole new light.
I think we all might.
Yeah,
Well, this has been an incredible journey.
it has.
From ancient Mesopotamia to the modern hipster beard.
Who knew beards could be so fascinating?
I know. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of beards. It's been a real pleasure.
Absolutely.